Welcome to the Town Hall meeting on the Route 7 Towston Road intersection. I'm Scott Knight. I'm co-chair of the GFCA Transportation Committee. I'd like to welcome our guests this evening. First, I'd like to acknowledge Supervisor John Faust. He's on this evening representing the Drainsville District, as well as Tom Pisiadny. I understand will be dialing in this evening, and thank you for being here tonight. I'd also like to introduce our panelists. Bill Canis, as the president of Great Falls Citizens Association. Mike Barclay is my co-chair of the Transportation Committee. Bill Cutler is the Vdot District Construction Engineer who is overseeing Vdot's Route 7 widening project. And Steve Kuntz of Dewberry is Vdot's design consultant for the Route 7 project. I'd like to thank you all for coming, and thank you all the attendees here who've dialed in. We have a big group, so there's clearly a lot of interest. About a dozen of residents have asked to speak tonight. The focus of tonight's meeting is on safety and design issues associated with the Route 7 Towston Road intersection, the site of an accident in early December that took the life of a longtime Great Falls resident. The Town Hall is the second of three transportation-related town hall meetings that GFCA is hosting this spring. Last month, we hosted a meeting on the replacement of the one-lane bridge on Springvale Road. Later this spring, we will hold our third transportation town hall meeting, which will focus on the protection of Georgetown Pike, which is Virginia's first scenic and historic byway. Vdot is re-engineering the Route 7 Towston Road intersection as part of the broader Route 7 widening project. Our community, of course, is concerned about the post-construction safety of the intersection given the fatal accident that's occurred. And as we discovered through discussions with residents in preparation for this town hall meeting, the community has a number of specific concerns about the intersection's safety and functionality. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to provide our residents a forum to share their concerns about the intersection and to provide input to Vdot, including our residents' recommendations for refining Vdot's intersection plan to make the intersection safe and functional. Let me take a minute to provide you with an overview of the agenda for our meeting. Bill Canis, GFCA president, will deliver some opening words. From there, we will move directly to remarks by those who have requested to speak to highlight the concerns the community has. As I said earlier, we have about a dozen people who will speak on a range of issues. We are going to reserve discussion of individual issues raised by our speakers until later in the meeting so that all of our speakers will have time to make their remarks. We've asked each speaker to limit their remarks to 3 minutes. After our speaker remarks, Bill Cutler of Vdot and Steve Kuntz of Dewberry will present a 10-minute overview of the Vdot plan for the intersection. They will talk about the intersection as it existed before the widening project began, interim changes Vdot's made to the intersection, and how the intersection will look when the work is complete, I believe in 2022. Then my GFCA associates, Mike Barclay and Bill Canis, and I will oversee a moderated panel session in which we will revisit the issues presented by our speakers and dive into them in some detail. Bill Cutler of Vdot and Steve Kuntz of Dewberry will respond to the questions we put to them. I want to note at this point, we cannot open the discussion to all attendees because of the size of the group. As we talk about a specific issue raised by our speakers, we will unmute that speaker so they may participate in the discussion, and we will remute them when we move on to a different issue. However, we do have the question function turned on, and you may post questions and comments at any time during the meeting. We will be monitoring the questions and comments posted by attendees, and we do our very best to make sure that they are addressed. The meeting is being recorded and a video of it will be placed on GFCA's website. The moderated session will take up the bulk of our meeting time, and we hope it will provide the community with the information that it wants. We will follow the moderated session with a short introduction to the final transportation-related town hall meeting we'll hold later this spring on protecting Georgetown Pike. Bill Canis, GFCA president, will close our meeting with a few concluding remarks. Please let me introduce Bill Canis for his opening words. Again, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Scott, for those remarks, and welcome to our guests tonight. It's good to see Bill Cutler and Steve Kuntz joining us tonight. Thank you for making the time for this program. I'd also like to thank Jane Edmondson. I believe she's has registered to join us, Chief of Staff to Supervisor Faust, and Scott may have mentioned this before I chimed in, but I believe Supervisor Faust might join us tonight too. He was registered to join us. If so, we we welcome him, and of course would welcome any remarks that our supervisor has to say at any point during this program. As to GFCA, we have been a voice here in the communities for more than 52 years. And of all the Commonwealth agencies that we deal with over the years, I would say that Vdot is our favorite. Always transportation issues, and we deal with other Commonwealth agencies as well, like the Department of Environmental Quality and Natural Resources and so on, but not on the continuous basis that we work with our colleagues at Vdot. So thank you. That's a long-standing relationship we have. I'd like to say also, just in passing, that Great Falls feels somewhat surrounded by the embrace of transportation issues. To our southern border, all along our southern border, is the widening of Route 7, which has already resulted in the closure of several streets for a year as part of that process. Also in that area, we have 2 one-lane bridges, which are part of the one-lane bridge structures in Great Falls. We have quite a few of them, but there are 2 of them there. One of them is being proposed for replacement, and so that's a major issue in our community. And of course, to the east is the hot lanes for 495. Well, technically not in Great Falls. The intersection most impacted is going to be the Georgetown Pike intersection, which will have an impact ultimately on our transportation issues in Great Falls. And then, of course, tonight's focus will be on the Tolston Road interchange as well. And Scott has addressed some of those issues as we discussed earlier at a transportation committee meeting as well. So all around us, we have these transportation issues, and this is perhaps the most critical, transportation is the most critical issue facing Great Falls at this point because of all of those projects which surround us at this time. Very unusual to have our south, our east, and our major corridors all subject to VDOT attention. In our next town hall, which is yet to be determined after this, we are going to focus on preservation of Georgetown Pike. That is an historic byway, actually the first historic byway in Virginia, been strongly supported by our county and state officials over the years. And yet, despite that preservation status, there is concern and about erosions to that historic character of that roadway. So at a future program, we will be delving into some of those issues. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say tonight. And I see that Supervisor Faust on the screen there. So I'd like to say that Supervisor Faust has represented the Drainsville District. I believe he's in his 4th term, most recently reelected in 2019. John is the chair of the Housing Committee, previously chair of the Transportation Committee. And most important for us, he is the Drainsville supervisor. So John, please take the floor if you'd like.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. I am very much looking forward to the discussion this evening, and I do want to say how much I appreciate the outstanding effort that GFCA has focused on transportation issues recently, especially as Bill suggests. It's almost unbelievable how much is going on around us, most of which affects us. So anyway, I look forward to this presentation, and I especially look forward to the presentation or the meeting on the preservation of Georgetown Pike. I think that it is time that to again remind the world that Georgetown Pike is special and has a Senate resolution to prove it. from the Virginia State Legislature that dictates how we should be treating the Pike. So anyway, all good stuff, and appreciate the panelists. You got the A team, and so we're gonna be able to solve a lot of problems tonight, right, Bill Cutler? So thank you, Bill. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for those remarks this evening, John. And by the way, thank you also for attending our February 25th town hall on the Springvale Road Bridge as well. We know you're busy and have a lot of things to do, so that you set aside this time to attend these meetings often for the whole program. We don't take that for granted. So thanks again for your interest in what goes on in Great Falls. At this point, I'm turning the program over to the other co-chair of transportation, Michael Barclay.
Thank you, Bill. Scott, if you could pop up that intersection file. While Scott's doing that, I'm going to cover the first one or two issues about intersection. Carl Pearson's going to add to that with a personal experience that he's had with it. We have about 10 or 12 members of the community that have asked to speak tonight. And as Scott said earlier, we're going to just roll through those without discussion of the individual issues and just go through them completely. After that, then we're going to, Bill Cutler and Steve Kuntz are going to make a presentation on some of the design issues at the thing. And then we're going to go back into the individual issues and have a more hearty discussion on them on an issue by issue basis. And so we make sure everybody's satisfied. I thought I'd start with 3 slides that give you just kind of a basic orientation to the intersection. The red circle there is, of course, the intersection. Eastbound, Route 7, of course, heads towards Tyson's, westbound towards Leesburg, and then southbound Towston heads towards Wolf Trap. As you can see, the small little circle up there is the intersection leading into the Arden development. Scott, if you go to the next slide, please. And I wanted to give you a sense of the scale of the Arden development in relation to the area around it. It's pretty impressive. There is one entrance and exit out of the Arden development at this point. And it's 100+ homes. We don't have an exact count, but it's quite a bit of traffic that is going to be generated out there. And the point of showing this also is to show how close it is, the entrance exit of Arden to the Route 7 intersection. And there's a lot of concern about the impact of that. Scott, next slide, please. This is a road level view of the intersection. We're looking north up Towston with this view. The line of cars would be coming south on Towston, and some of them would be turning left towards eastbound Route 7, just as a bit of an orientation. I'm going to talk about 2 issues here. One is sightline distance at the intersection, and the other is constrained turn lanes. And we've had this come up quite frequently in the discussions we've been having. The fatal accident at the intersection occurred when a vehicle was traveling southbound on Towston, like those cars in the line, and attempting to turn left on the Route 7 towards Tyson's. And reportedly, a distracted driver who was traveling west on Route 7 ran through the red light at the intersection and struck the turning vehicle. What the community is seeking is an assurance that the intersection will be safe as possible when Vdot completes its work under the widening project. We know that Vdot has very specific design standards for intersection sight lines. And what that means is that when a car is turning left on the Route 7 from Towston, that the driver would have an unimpeded view of traffic traveling west on Route 7. Sightline distances are expressed in terms of feet. That is, how far can the driver of the turning vehicle see a vehicle approaching the intersection. So the higher the posted speed, the longer the sightline distance needs to be. And the more lanes the vehicle has to cross, the longer the sightline distance requirements. So the question on this is, can VDOT assure us that the sightline distances for completed intersections will meet or exceed VDOT design standards, especially for southbound Towston traffic turning left on the eastbound Route 7 towards Tyson's, which is where the accident occurred. The second part of this is vehicles that are traveling west on Route 7 turning northbound on the Towston. Currently large vehicles don't seem to be able to safely make that right turn from Route 7 onto Towston without encroaching unsafely into the southbound lanes. So they're encroaching over the middle line there and unsafely kind of encroaching on the vehicles traveling south. So the question here is, in the final design, how will Vdot how will the plan take care of that issue? Also, it doesn't appear that on the approach to Towston from Route 7, that there's enough, lengthy enough turn lane for cars to decelerate from Route 7, and it doesn't seem long enough to store the traffic that might stack up there. So again, the question is, will the final plan address that issue? I'm going to turn this over to Carl Pearson now. Carl has a personal experience with that issue of turning trucks, vehicles that are turning onto Towston Road. Carl? We need to turn Carl on.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. My name's Carl Pearson. I've been a resident at Great Falls for 32 years, and I've been on the Transportation Committee since 2009. My involvement in Tolston Road goes back to Toll Brothers having two entrances, exits, one further down Tolston Road, which was very dangerous on a hilly blind curve. My former colleague, GFCA, Eric Knudsen, and I did a traffic count, and we showed that there was as much traffic coming into Tolston as well as going out of Tolston. It's a busy road. And Toll Brothers decided not to have that second entrance. That would have been another accident creator. I had intended to go over and look at trucks turning into this development, understand that these houses are being sold. Moving vans are 18-wheelers and they're huge. But we had an incident that occurred at 5:30 p.m. on Monday, March 22nd, when our daughter was first in line to turn left from Tolston Road onto Route 7. She looked left and saw an 18-wheeler speeding to make the right turn onto Tolston. There were cars behind her, so she could not back up. Fortunately, the truck driver saw that the intersection was too small for him to turn, so he hit his brakes hard and skidded into the intersection, narrowly avoiding our daughter's car by inches. Although the car lanes were jammed, all the cars behind our daughter backed up and moved over into the other lanes so that the tractor trailer could turn across 3 lanes and enter Arden to deliver a full load. A few more inches and that tractor trailer would have demolished our daughter's car, and she would not have survived. The tractor trailer driver in a high cab probably would have survived. Will Toll Brothers look ahead and see that their future residents will be the first to complain about that dangerous intersection? Probably not. They will have banked their profits and moved on. The GFCA will then represent those new homeowners. This was a real near-death accident that didn't happen, thankfully.
Thank you, Carl. Susan Blakely has asked to speak about Route 7 speed limits. So Susan, we'll turn you on here. Susan Blakely on.
I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you. My name is Susan Blakely, and I have been a resident of Great Falls for over 40 years. I've served on the executive board of the GFCA and have been involved with the organization for many years. I appreciate the work that the GFCA does and the opportunity to speak to you tonight. The issue that I want to address in these short remarks is excessive speed on Route 7. I was involved in a very serious accident 4 years ago at the Tolston Road Route 7 intersection, and speed was a factor in that multi-vehicle collision. It is a miracle that no one was killed. It cannot be denied that cars travel well above the speed limit on Route 7. If anyone doubts that, I suggest that they get in the left-hand turn lane on eastbound Route 7 at either of its intersections with Calvin Run Road or at the Tolston Road intersection to get a feel for what I am talking about. As cars queue up for the left-hand turn, through traffic moves at speeds as high, I believe, as 65 miles an hour. The queued up cars shake from the impact of the speeding traffic, even cars like mine, which is a heavy SUV. It is frightening, and it is another accident waiting to happen and future lives to be lost. So I respectfully suggest that in addition to intersection improvements, the speed on Route 7 be addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. Steve Meyer has asked to speak about a similar issue, but with a few extra items on it. Steve, are you online?
Steve, I don't see Steve on board.
Okay.
But we can move on to David Marion, I believe.
Okay, David, floor is yours.
Yes. Okay. I'm the vice president of Limo Meadows Homeowners Association, and we would like to emphasize that there be a dedicated left turn arrow southbound on Tolston, turning left toward Tyson's. We think it's critical that there's an arrow there so traffic continues to move. And this is just something I want to add that it probably goes without saying, but Vdot, the traffic engineers need to determine the length of the green lights needed at that intersection so the traffic never backs up to block the Arden entrance. Because once that entrance is blocked, those residents from Arden, they're going to have nowhere to go. They're either going to stick their nose out blocking the northbound direction, or they're going to have to turn right and make a U-turn to get in the line. So hopefully VDOT will engineer that to death so traffic will never back up blocking that intersection during rush hour. But that's the two things that we wanted to mention. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Ed Phillips is going to speak a bit about the need for data and for data tools. Ed, are you with us?
Oh, there we go. I unmuted myself. Can you see me? Like I said, I'll speak.
We can hear you.
There we go. Yeah, I think, you know, being an engineer, I'm always looking for data and how we analyze, you know, situations. And so this is one of these areas that I think we need more data for internal community discussions and discussions to be productive with the VDOT. And so I'm just trying to understand if we can get some more data about what's the baseline for people traveling through the Tolston intersection. You know, there's, even before Arden, you know, how many vehicles just cross over Tolston Road, over Route 7, you know, during the rush hour and 24 hours. We don't have that data. And then with Arden, you know, how many vehicles are coming in and out of Arden? How many are going southbound? How many are going northbound? Don't have that data. And then, you know, as vehicles move through the intersection, does it change, you know, from the AM to PM? What does it look like, you know, at 24 hours a day? You know, maybe some of them go to Georgetown Pike the other direction, but I'm sure VDOT has some information that we could baseline and have some discussion about what the changes are. I'm going to try to type those up and enter them into chat if that's okay.
That's perfect. Thank you, Ed. Steve Meyer is going to, we missed him because he was under a different name, but he's going to be on next to talk about his issue about Route 7 speed limits. Peter, do we have his nom de plume there?
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
Yep, should have it.
Can you hear me now?
We have you.
Yep.
Okay, great. So the questions that the concerns that we had was, one, we were concerned about the speed limit on Route 7. I also believe that that should be lowered and maybe maintained at 45 miles an hour after the construction is done. Our other concern is that when Wolf Trap is reopened after the pandemic, there's never been any real traffic control out there for that intersection after or before shows like they do have at McLean Bible. So our question was, so basically we know that, Wolf Trap's a 7,000 sold out show. So maybe, at least 1,000 cars will pass through the intersection because there's no westbound route on the, toll road to escape from Wolf Trap. And so that's one of our concerns, that there's nobody there, and I don't know if they're taking any account into those shows and how much traffic there really is. And then we were wondering about getting the lines repainted. Even now on the Great Falls side, the lines are all gone for the different lanes and whatnot that were there. So you can clearly see which lane you're supposed to be in, because it's pretty confusing actually about whether or not you're going straight across or taking a right, or which lane you're supposed to be in. It's not clear. My other suggestion is that the intersection should just be made into a four-way stop, like we have when you get down into the heart of Tyson's, where they're stopping every flow of traffic so that the other traffic can pass safely, unless somebody runs a red light, of course. But, so that's my thought, is that they should be stopping the traffic there all four ways. And the last thing we have for residents of Schaus Village, may have already heard about this, but the way the island is been cut back into Tolston on the Schaus Village side, we have people that are taking the left and taking the right into Tolston, going towards Wolf Trap, and they're coming down the wrong side of the street because the other side of the street has been narrowed on the side where they should be turning so much that some people are not even really seeing it. So they're coming down the wrong way on the other side. And that's really the last issue I had. Thank you for listening.
Okay, Bill Gleckberg is up now, talking about light timing on Route 7.
Can you hear me? I
Yes.
hope so. I have two things that I wanted to talk about. I've been a 40-year resident, and I used to commute to Tyson's where I work, so I've made a lot of left turns at that intersection. I learned early on, do not jump the signal. Too many people run the red light on Route 7, and they'll just broadside you, as we've seen the fatal accident. So I don't know what the solution to that is, whether there's some kind of warning system, some way to make the drivers be aware that the red light's coming and you need to stop. So I'm very worried about that. And then the other thing that hit me is we have very long cycle times, typically over 4 minutes. And as a result, a lot of traffic builds up on the Towlston side waiting to get on. And people get kind of antsy. I've seen them do crazy things because they're getting antsy waiting to turn. And this leads me to my last subject, which is when I was commuting to Tyson, it was terrible down in Tyson's because the signals were not coordinated with each other. And as a result, you'd get a green light and then you'd run into a red light, then you'd run into another red light. And Vdot finally coordinated all the signals and the traffic moved through in groups through there. And I keep wondering if something like that needs to be done all along Route 7 for the various roads like Tolston. Those are my three things to talk about, worried about. Thank you very much for having this session.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate the presentation. Our next speaker is Bill Canis, who's going to talk on Vdot's policy on subdivision entrances and exits.
Thank you. for those who talked about pavement markings, by the way, I'd say that I'm not driving on Route 7 much these days, but with the lanes changing, it is kind of hard to know where the lanes are going to go next. So any improvement to the lane markings, as someone mentioned, I think would be very helpful for all motorists through that corridor. Even though those lane markings are temporary, but it's a little bit like a carnival ride through there with so many switchbacks anymore. So obviously understand the reason for that because of the construction. But yeah, Bill, our last committee meeting of transportation, we highlighted an issue which we're just trying to learn from. As GFCA, we're all volunteers. None of us are land use attorneys. None of us are, most of us are not transportation engineers and things like that. So we only learn by engaging with you folks. And so one question we have pertains to the issue of a second entrance. And I don't want to return to all those discussions about the second entrance, which was removed for safety reasons, but rather looking at this at a little bit higher level. Our experience before this in dealing with second entrances was another subdivision being built in Great Falls off of between Walker Road and Springvale Road, now called Rivermont, at the time called Brooks Farm. And in there is a proffer that was agreed to by the builder, was agreed to by the county. Obviously, proffers have a legal binding status, and was encouraged by Vdot at the time. And the proffer reads, I'll just read you the sentence that's relevant. Dealing with an interparcel connection, it says the interparcel connection, which in this case would have added a second entrance to Rivermont from Springvale, the original and permanent entrance being off of Forest Lake Drive, so two different roads. The interparcel connection shall be constructed as shown on the GDP contemporaneously with the construction of Forest Lake Drive extended into the property. And here's the part that I was hoping you might educate us about. Unless a waiver of construction is approved by Vdot. So that's what we're trying to understand more about. And obviously there is some applicability to Arden. But in general, this is kind of I'd say a higher level question about what is, from Vdot's, from you guys who are prominent officials at Vdot, what is that waiver process that is built into the legal proffer for that other subdivision? How does that work? And was that mandated by a state law, as we were once told by one of your colleagues who was involved in Rivermont? We're trying to understand how this works and what is that waiver process. According to the proffer, it seems like it's it is at the something that Vdot has and has authority over. So anyway, that's a question which we'd like to discuss with you this evening too. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Next up is Pam Grosner, who is going to talk about the impact of Arden traffic on Georgetown Pike. Pam?
Yes, as Mike has said, I'm Pam Grosner. I've been a resident of Great Falls for over 26 years. I'm currently on the GFCA board, and I have been a chair or co-chair of the Transportation Committee for 6 years during the period 2012 to 2018. I have an additional issue that I would like to mention tonight. That is that the Arden development will also likely result in much more traffic on Georgetown Pike and Old Dominion Drive as drivers seek alternate routes, be it Tolston Road and Laymill Road, or Bellevue or other connecting roads in McLean. Arden will have more than 100 homes when it's completed, and likely well more than 200 vehicles associated with those homes. Each time one of these vehicles or a service provider that services the home arrives at or departs the home in this development, a trip will be generated. For example, going to work in the morning counts as one trip, and returning home in the evening counts as a second. 2 trips are generated by an Amazon delivery, another 2 by a landscaping crew, and so on. According to transportation planners, the average home generates slightly more than 10 trips per day. Based on this, it's expected that Arden, people that live in Arden, when it's finally populated, will create over 1,000 additional trips per day. While we can't predict how many of those 1,000 trips will affect local roads in our communities, and on Georgetown Pike in particular, it's inevitable that traffic on the Pike will increase, further aggravating the already heavy congestion that we have on Georgetown Pike during rush hour when vehicles inch along. I can attest to that. I live on Georgetown Pike. So does Scott. And so does the Falcons, As Virginia's first historic and scenic byway, Georgetown Pike must be protected and preserved. It's our main street. It's my main street. A street bordered by homes. Some of those homes are historic. The Village, Great Falls Grange and the old schoolhouse, Great Falls National Park, and in McLean, the residential areas there. In Great Falls alone, there are 724 properties whose primary access is via the Pike. Of those 646 properties, only access is via the Pike. So when traffic backs up during the rush hour, in order to reach our homes, we have to sit there. There are no other back routes that we can go. These include driveways directly off the Pike, as well as neighborhoods whose only entrance is from the Pike. And there are a lot of neighborhoods whose only entrance is from the Pike. Georgetown Pike and its feeder roads, which are Springdale and Walker and Underback and Layville, were already under immense pressure before Route 7 widening project. Unfortunately, this pressure is anticipated to increase because of ongoing growth within Great Falls, as well as in the surrounding communities and points west. The 18,000 vehicles per day that we now see, or saw in 2019, they haven't done a recent count, will likely increase if nothing is done to encourage the use of Route 7 and calm traffic on the Pike. The Pike cannot and should not serve as a high volume east-west commuter route. That is precisely what the community advocated for the widening of Route 7. Thank you for considering my points in your time this evening.
Thank you, Pam. Our next speaker is Scott Knight. Scott's going to talk about Vdot intersection design decisions. Scott?
Yes, thank you. So a partial intersection was planned at the Route 7 Barron Cameron intersection. That was eliminated by Vdot in its final project plan for the Route 7 and widening project. Vdot cited budget constraints because of higher than expected contractor bids. The partial interchange would have dramatically improved the eastbound flow on Route 7 and made the Route 7 Barron Cameron intersection much safer. I'm sharing here, this is an illustration of what the partial intersection would have looked like. Traffic traveling eastbound on Route 7 would not stop at the intersection. Instead, it would travel under the Springvale Barron Cameron under Springvale Barron Cameron, which would be connected by a partial bridge, which would be at grade, which means that Springvale Road and Barron Cameron would be roughly at the same elevation. This design would eliminate the current elevation difference between the two roads as they intersect with Route 7. A couple of the advantages of a partial interchange at Barron Cameron: one, there would not be a stoplight impeding eastbound Route 7 during morning rush hour, allowing cars to more quickly make the morning hour commute to Tyson's Corner. And two, the design would eliminate elevation differentials for vehicles traveling through the intersection, making the intersection safer and more efficient. Let me reflect on the first point for a moment. Route 7 is an engine of growth for Fairfax County, and the Commonwealth of Virginia and Fairfax County are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to widen Route 7s so that traffic can flow quicker and more efficiently through the Route 7 corridor. The decision by Vdot to eliminate the partial interchange works against that goal, indirectly reducing Fairfax County's return on investment. Maximizing that investment is, as we understand, a key objective of our Board of Supervisors. As an aside, I'd like to add that it is our understanding that two important design parameters of the Route 7 widening project were that an expanded Route 7 would speed commuter traffic into and out of Tysons, and that the completed project would not promote commuter leakage onto Georgetown Pike and the feeder roads to the Pike. Unfortunately, we fear that the widening project will instead substantially increase traffic and traffic congestion on the Pike, and that Vdot is missing an opportunity to maximize traffic flow on Route 7. Bottom line, what's being built at the Barron Cameron Springvale Road intersection is in fact substantially less than Vdot's original plan. Traffic flow would be slower and the intersection would be less safe. Let me move to the Route 7 Towston intersection. We all know of the fatal accident at the intersection, and it's our hope that Vdot's design plan for the intersection will result in a safe and efficient intersection. But as you've heard tonight, many residents fear that it won't. We worry that after Vdot completes its widening project, we will be left with two important intersections, Route 7 at Barron Cameron and Route 7 at Towston, that may be under-engineered to safely handle current and future traffic, especially with Route 7 expanding to 6 lanes at both intersections. We recognize that we're in construction phase of the Route 7 project and that a substantial redesign of either intersection at this point is not a reasonable ask. However, we think that it is reasonable to ask that Vdot work with Great Falls and other neighboring communities to monitor both intersections over time. And if they aren't as safe and as functional as expected, that Vdot work with us to re-engineer one or both intersections. So I have two questions. One, I hope you can address, what would be a convincing argument in the future that one or both intersections are due for upgrade? And then two, is congestion monitoring a reasonable ask to show that at-grade intersections are not making sufficient reductions in congestion? Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. David Spencer, you wanted to reserve whether you wanted to speak on your topic. Do you want to speak now or wait till perhaps later?
Yes, I specifically want to see what the final design of the intersection will be, because my concern today is that there is no way to widen that intersection because of the location of utility poles and the support arms for the traffic lights. And something is going to have to be moved either on the Arden side of the property or the northwest corner of that intersection to widen it sufficiently to give enough lanes to contain the traffic that wants to turn left and or allow for right turns. And the intersection is far too narrow. As Carl pointed out earlier, large trucks cannot make the right turn off of westbound Route 7 onto Tolston Road today. So I'm very interested to see how it is that Vdot will address those issues. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Jennifer Falcone is up next, but Jennifer's asked to reserve her speaking time until later, after the Vdot Dewberry presentation. And we're going to move next into Cutler and Steve Kuntz, Bill Cutler from Vdot and Steve Kuntz from Vdot's design contractor, Dewberry. And they're going to present a 10-minute overview of the intersection. When they're done, all the issues that we've raised but haven't addressed, we're going to go back in and look at those in some detail. We want to make sure that people's issues are addressed and where we have answers and they can give good, really good explanations of what's going on. Well, that'll be great. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Bill Cutler of Vdot, and have at it, Bill.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks to everyone who's commented. We appreciate the opportunity to be able to address some concerns. Hopefully we'll provide some helpful information, and we can also take a look at what we can refine further. So I'm Bill Cutler. I'm the District Construction Engineer for Vdot, Arlington, Fairfax, Prince William, and Loudoun County. I live here in Fairfax County, not too far off of Route 7. I'm very familiar with the corridor. With me today is Steve Kuntz. So of Dewberry, Vdot entered into a design build contract with the Shirley Dewberry team, who is currently delivering this project in the field. We are in the midst of obviously a remarkable transformation of Route 7 between Reston and Tysons, but also we are preparing a significant transformation of this very intersection. And so Steve is going to hit on some of the main points that we heard. We're not going to answer everything right now in this presentation, but as Mike said, we'll be here for the Q&A after. So Steve?
Sure. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this evening. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Let's see if everybody can see. I apologize. Hopefully everybody can see the screen now. So as Bill mentioned, all of the points and comments made here this evening are certainly valid, and they are things that we consider throughout the design phase. So I think we will have some information that we can share on each of those topics to hopefully alleviate some concerns. 10 minutes is not enough time to go through them. We do have several slides here, and I'll just hit on the highlights that I can. Certainly Route 7 is designed for 60 miles an hour. Tolston Road is designed for 35 miles an hour. That's not necessarily the posted speed. And I think somebody hit on it earlier. We've reduced the speed to 45 miles an hour currently during construction because frankly, many of the elements of Route 7 prior to construction don't meet the design requirements for 55 or 60 miles an hour. So when there's construction activity and work zones going on, it was even more important to reduce the speed to 45. But the plan is to increase it back to 55 when the improvements are complete and the roadways brought up to current standards to meet the 60 mile an hour criteria. A lot of discussion about turn lane lengths. They will be lengthened as part of the permanent improvements. And then signal timing is something that we can talk about in a little bit more detail later. Certainly sight lines and sight distances at signalized intersections and unsignalized intersections, each of those has their own requirements. As Mike hit on earlier, they are dependent on the design speed. They're dependent on the width of the road in many other cases. At a signalized intersection like Tolston, it's different than at an unsignalized intersection. And even though at a signalized intersection, you only need to look at the very immediately around the intersection, we do have adequate sight lines much further than that. And we can talk through those details here in a little bit. I think the most important thing to recognize for everyone is, as you can imagine, this is still an active construction zone. There's a lot of changes that have already occurred, but there's equally as many changes that still have yet to occur before we get to completion. So the picture that you see on your screen now is of the pre-construction configuration where there was a lane and a quarter or a lane and a half that existed right at the intersection at Route 7 in the southbound approach. Two different pictures of essentially the same thing. The one in the bottom right here shows the striping a little bit more visible. We've changed that configuration now to what's shown on the screen today, where there are 2 lanes approaching Route 7 that are much longer. That's still an interim configuration. And I know some of this may be difficult to see, but the white lines here represent the interim striping plan. In the ultimate configuration, the turn lanes will all be lengthened. We'll get into those details here shortly. And there will be 3 lanes approaching Route 7 on southbound Tolston Road. So there will be a dedicated left turn lane, a dedicated right turn lane, and a dedicated through lane. And there's other improvements on Route 7 as well that will help with the operations. So this is the permanent configuration. While some of this work will be completed in 2022, the permanent configuration of this intersection won't be in place until 2024 when the full contract is complete. Now, truck operations is something else that we consider. One of the things to recognize is there's a lot of different types of trucks. There's single unit trucks that are not articulated. There are articulated trucks, and of those, there are many different lengths. The large trucks that you see on the interstate, the long haul trucks, typically have a 53-foot trailer. Those are identified as a WB67, and that's not what this intersection is designed for. This intersection is designed for a smaller articulated truck. It's a WB40. You can see it on the bottom right here, and that's one that has a 33-foot trailer. So it is a smaller truck, but it is still articulated, and that's what it's been designed for. We look at those analysis through all phases of construction. So here on the graphic, you can see the operations of that WB40 turning left from Route 7 onto Tolston, as well as off of Tolston onto Route 7 in the pre-construction configuration. As we move to the interim configuration that's showing now on the screen, we also analyzed it for the WB40 at that time. And then in the permanent configuration, you can see there are accommodations again for that WB40. Now, each of these configurations is a little bit different because the lane configurations change. So all of the analysis is updated to make sure that it's going to work the whole way throughout. There's a lot of other details on this slide that we can talk to when we get into the dialogue back and forth with Mike and Scott. Some details that are not as easily to see unless we point them out specifically. So we can get into those details here in a little bit. And then finally, coordination with Toll Brothers, the Arden at McLean development, and the improvements to Tolston. There have already been a lot of coordination that went on. The profile of Tolston Road has been changed. Sidewalk shared use path accommodations have been changed, and the configuration and lane alignments going up at the approach to Route 7 have also been changed. So again, there's a lot of details on this slide. We talked through about 100 houses. We can get into some of those details about traffic volumes, what the old peak volume estimates were, and what the projections are. Some of that data here is on the screen, and we can get into more details with that. So I think looking through all of this, the most important thing to recognize and that we wanted to point out is that we're still not in the final configuration. It is still a work in progress. So we still have time to make tweaks if tweaks are warranted. But we want to make sure everybody recognizes that what you see today is not the permanent configuration. And the reason that things are out there today is there are a lot of constraints that we have to get through: utility relocations, right-of-way acquisition, and just sequencing of work to make sure that we can maintain traffic throughout construction. So a lot of things to think about. I know that's a lot of information, and I think I'm under 10 minutes, so I think maybe we'll turn it back over to Mike and Scott at this point and start the dialogue.
Thank you, Steve. Back to you, Mike and Scott. You're muted.
Thank you very much. So far, we have had 7 questions that have been submitted. And so there's a Q&A mechanism at the bottom of your screen there. And if you do have a question, you're certainly welcome to click on that and include a question you might have in the Q&A. For example, Steve Meyer had submitted a question raising a concern about a huge puddle. I believe it's on the northwest corner of the Towston Road Route 7 intersection where there's not drainage there, often blocking the right turn lane. Is there a way to fix that in the near term?
Scott, if we could, let's move through the discussion with the topics as we had them in our sequence of questions. And let me start with sight lines. Steve, my understanding from your presentation is the analysis that you guys did meant that somebody that's making that left turn onto Towston from southbound, onto Route 7 from southbound Towston, they'll be able to see far enough that they'd see any speeding vehicle coming their way. It won't protect against the vehicle that might run a red light, but in any event, the driver on Towston Road will have plenty of sight distance in order to spot any vehicle. In fact, it seems like your design exceeds the sightline distance standards. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think there's 2 things I wanted to point out here. At a signalized intersection, the Vdot and AASHTO criteria, AASHTO is the federal design requirements. For a signalized intersection, you're only required to have sight lines so that you can see the cars stopped at the intersection that are stopped at the other approaches. So right at the stop bars. That distance at an intersection like this might be only 75 to 100 feet. If it's a stop controlled intersection where you don't have a signal, then those sight lines increase significantly based on the size of the road, the design speed, and the posted speed of the road. And so for Route 7, where you have a 60-mile-an-hour speed and 3 lanes of traffic that you would have to cross to make a left turn, if that intersection was unsignalized, you'd have to be able to see almost 800 feet to the east. So if you're coming down Tolston Road from the north and sitting at the light and you look to the left towards Tyson's Corner, you would need to be able to see 800 feet to make the decision to turn left and know that nobody was going to be coming through the intersection. Based on the profile and the alignment of Route 7, we're actually able to see about 1,100 feet, if not a little bit more. So what you see on the graphic here, there's a yellow line off to the far right of the screen. That's the high point in Route 7 that would obstruct the view of somebody turning off of Tolston. That's at about 1,100 feet. The pink lines represent the sight lines that you'd have to be able to see for that 800 feet plus or minus if it was an unsignalized intersection. So it is going to be much improved from the pre-construction configuration where there was growth right up against Route 7. There were large hills. Those are some of the standards that I mentioned earlier that weren't being met. With the improvements, with the addition of shared use paths and the flatter grades on Route 7, all of that will be improved in the permanent condition.
Steve, I understand too that the utilities that are currently on the corner of Tolston and Route 7 are going to be moved to the other side, and I think those not only impeded right-hand turns, but it also might have impeded sight lines. Is that correct that they're moving?
That's right. Yep. What's out there today, one of the constraints is honestly the signal pole that's out there in the northeast corner. And that's something that's going to be moved here later this summer. And that'll allow the turning movements and sight lines to be improved to even more from what they are right now. So yes, that was an obstruction and will be for a short more time.
Right. And to the right, if I can jump in, when you're coming southbound on Tolston and looking to the right, I was out there this afternoon just to take another look, and we're grading out just huge quantities of earth, grading out that embankment on that northwest quadrant. Steve, if you want to put your little arrow over there, and that's an indicator of just how much the sight lines will be changed and improved as we're taking out the earth to make space for the widened Route 7 and the multi-purpose trails. That's the gray lines that you see on either side. Those are multi-purpose trails that we've also committed to build. So that also provides additional flat area for a driver to be able to view on oncoming traffic. Although, of course, we all know we expect drivers to stop at a red light. And it is very hard to design against people that will not stop at a red light. And someone said earlier, they always pause when they get the green. And I've been doing that for years myself. If I get a green light, just take a moment, nobody's coming, or they have stopped, and then I pull out.
Great. By the way, as Scott mentioned, feel free to put in questions into the thing. We're looking at those, and we're trying to make sure we work in those into this discussion. The next quick issue was the right turn from westbound Route 7 on the northbound Towston, and the clearances that trucks don't have enough room to safely make that turn. And Steve, you talked to that just a little bit in terms of the design standard was for a large truck to be able to safely make that turn. But obviously there's things that are changing at that intersection that would provide a whole lot more room for larger vehicles to do that. Could you go over that and basically give us an assurance that those design standards are sufficient to make that a safe intersection when that's done?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, the design vehicle it's listed here. The design vehicle is not necessarily the largest vehicle that will ever make the turn. It's the vehicles that could be expected to make this movement on a regular basis. So this is not just a circumstance here at Tolston Road, but it's at all of the other intersections along Route 7, and even further, up Tolston Road and towards Georgetown Pike. Many of those intersections are not designed for the larger vehicles. Here, coming off of Route 7, it is designed for the WB40, which again is the 33-foot long trailer on an articulated truck. So as we go through the design, what we want to make sure is that all of the turning movements can accommodate that without the vehicle off tracking into an adjacent lane. So I know one of the comments earlier was a truck speeding along Westbound 7 and taking up three lanes to make that right turn. There's a couple things working against us right now. One is the really short right turn lane that trucks are not using because they can't even fit into it. That complicates the turning movement. Second, we still have the signal that's up in the northeast corner of the intersection. And until that move, that is restricting where we can put the temporary traffic barrier, which makes it look like the intersection is tighter. And I think there's truck drivers that are erring on the side of caution and going more out into the pavement so they don't strike the pole with the back into the trailer. But in all of the configurations that we looked at here in this interim condition, which is close to what's out there right now, you can see the WB40 is able to make that movement without off-tracking into the adjacent lanes. The WB40 is typical for this type of intersection, as I mentioned. If there's a full 53-foot trailer making this turn, they would need to go into the opposing lanes, or the back end of the trailer would run off the road a little bit. And that's something that can occur in some situations, but it's not the design vehicle for this type of roadway.
Steve, can you just clarify, because I think this is really a significant improvement that we're going to make. When you're on westbound Route 7, as you just said, there is a very short right turn lane. Can you describe how short that right turn lane is today? And then when we're done in the final condition, what is the length of that right turn lane? Because when you add length, it's not just about storing more vehicles, which is partly what it does, but it also in the free flow condition, it allows vehicles to slow down in that right turn lane. And as Mr. Pearson said earlier with the story of his daughter and that unfortunate incident, it sounds like a truck driver was not slowing down enough. So with our new right turn lane, go ahead and describe the differences.
Yeah, and I know this was another topic as well, that before construction started, that right turn lane from westbound Route 7 to northbound Tolston was only 50 feet long with about a 100-foot taper. Because of restrictions on what we could build and how fast we could build everything, right now, the current condition is only slightly better with a 55-foot right turn lane from westbound 7 to northbound Tolston Road. In the permanent configuration, we had to zoom out on this picture, as you can see, it's going to be a 290-foot right turn lane with a 200-foot taper. Now, the minimum that's allowed by standards is a 200-foot turn lane and a 200-foot taper. That's based on design speed. It's based on capacity analysis. Again, a lot of different things go into sizing of turn lanes. Right turn lanes can typically be a little bit shorter than left turn lanes, because as you can imagine, this right turn movement does not have to stop at a red light as frequently. The only time it has to stop at a red light is when the eastbound Route 7 left turn lane is in operation, or when the Tolston through movements are in operation. That's required to stop then, but at the other times they can make a right turn on red. So that's why the turn lanes can be shorter relative to the overall lengths. For a comparison, the left turn lanes are going to be around 900 to 1,000 feet on Route 7 approaching Tolston Road. And that's because they have to accommodate the queuing that's expected, plus the deceleration distance and the braking distance. So 290 feet is much longer than what's out there today. It'll accommodate the deceleration length. It will accommodate the queuing that's going to occur in that right turn lane while the signal's red. But it is much better than what's out there today.
Okay, we have a question about sight lines. When somebody's turning south on Towston from Route 7 heading westbound, given the hill coming east on Route 7, is there adequate visibility? So the westbound Route 7 turning south on Towston, that'd be a left turn.
Yes. This left turn, it is adequate. So the sight lines, as we look at these, there are different signal operations. There are permissive lefts and protected lefts. Permissive lefts is where people will get now the flashing yellow, and they can make the left turn on that flashing yellow if they're comfortable and if sight lines accommodate it. And at all of the intersections, we have to look at the analysis to make sure the sight lines, that we have adequate sight lines to make these permissive lefts. In this situation, we do have that distance looking further to the west. So that has been accounted for.
Okay. We have several questions about the speed limits and the issue of it being too high. My understanding is a posted speed when this is all done will be 55. And the question is, is there any consideration to making that a lower speed on approach to perhaps some of these intersections?
So typically, we're not going to be, we like to have a consistent speed limit through a corridor rather than up and down, because it helps with the driver expectations. In addition, we are designing it for, Steve, I believe you said 60 miles an hour, which then allows us to post it at 55, a little bit lower than what's designed, to build a better factor of safety into that. We do look, this is a primary highway. I realize that for the Great Falls community, I realize that we don't like the idea of there being a highway, but this is a significant primary highway into and out of Tyson's, and so being able to move the volume of traffic is very important. So that was reviewed during the design phase many years ago, and that speed limit and design speed was established there. I can say, though, if you don't mind, Mike, to just talk about the speed limit of Tolston for a moment. Is that okay?
Yep.
So Tolston, as you all know today, is 35 miles an hour, and at least one component of the GFCA and some citizen working group members were very concerned about that. And we did have our traffic engineering team go back and look at that. And even though that the entirety is technically not in our project, but we are moving to change the speed limit of Tolston between Route 7 and Lane Mill Road to make it 25 miles an hour. The section that we are improving is obviously closest to Route 7. That will be flatter. It has more visibility, but obviously as you go north, or on this slide to the right toward Lane Mill Road, it obviously there's a lot more hills and turns, and so we are going to repost that at 25 miles an hour, and that's coming up this month. That will happen, and that will be a permanent change. And as I said, that was in part because of the petition of the Route 7 Citizen Working Group, which includes some GFCA members.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. A couple questions here, and then we'll move on. There are a couple questions about the size of the design standard for the trucks. And one question is that larger than moving vans? And another person asked about 10-wheel dump trucks, whether or not they would be able, when this is done, be able to make that right turn onto Towston safely.
Sure. So the 10-wheel dump trucks, yes. In addition to the articulated truck that we looked at, the WB40, we looked at non-articulated vehicles like fire trucks and school buses. Large dump trucks are not as large as those vehicles, and they would be able to maneuver that turn without any problem. Moving vans, again, it depends. The long distance moving vans, if you're moving from East Coast to West Coast, those are traditionally the 53-foot trailers that are much larger. I know when we moved a few years ago, we had 2 non-articulated trucks. Those would be able to make the movement. Anything up to that 33-foot trailer would be able to make the turn without encroaching on the adjacent through lanes. The larger vehicles, the 53-foot trailers, they would have to maneuver out into an adjacent through lane, or turn wider, if you will, to make that maneuver.
All right. There's a couple of questions on timing. One person was asking basically what's, right now construction trucks are trying to go in there. There's not room. How are they going to get in and out of the Arden development? And what's the timing on these changes? When will that right turn be re-engineered up to be safer for the large vehicles turning right?
So the first thing that's going to happen here is later this summer that the traffic signal pole that's in the northeast quadrant, is going to be moved and relocated. There'll be a new signal pole going in further away from the intersection to accommodate the ultimate configuration. That will allow the barrier, the temporary concrete barrier that's currently placed along Tolston, to be adjusted. That'll allow some more room for the back ends of the trucks to run a little bit wider and allow them to turn tighter. That's the first thing that's going to happen. The ultimate improvements here at the intersection won't be fully complete until 2024. Some of the work will be completed in 2022, but it won't be the permanent configuration until 2024.
Okay.
Steve, when will the Jersey walls be removed at the northeast corner?
I'll have to check. I know they will be there through this summer. My gut tells me by 2022, a good majority of them will be gone. Right now they're protecting utilities, and as those utilities come out of the way and as the signal pole is moved, then those won't be required anymore.
Good. This question's a little off topic, but it's a good question. Somebody was very happy about the speed limit change on Towston, and she asked, is there consideration for a crosswalk between the new Arden walking path and the neighborhood roads that turn off of Route 7 like Hidden Creek? I don't know if that's an question you guys can answer or not.
I think what we can talk to is actually what's up on the screen right now. Again, that blue shading or the purple shading, whichever color it's coming across as, those are the shared use path and sidewalk improvements that are being built as part of Route 7. In the northeast corner, that will tie into a shared use path that the Arden development has built up to their property line. So it goes a little bit further to the north. But outside of what you see on the screen here and what's shown on purple, there aren't additional pedestrian improvements proposed. There is a crosswalk across the Arden entrance. There's also a crosswalk across Tolston from the Arden side to the Vernon Drive side. And then there are pedestrian actuated and push button actuated crosswalks at all four corners here at Route 7 in Tolston. So on Route 7, it is a continuous shared use path all the way from Tyson's and the work that was previously completed. That'll continue all the way to the very west end of the project at Georgetown Pike and tie into the facilities that were built as part of that previous widening going down towards Sugarland Run.
Okay, great. Let's move on to Ed Phillips had mentioned, had brought up the issue of baseline data and projections. It sounds to me like, and he had a number of data issues that he posted on data that we'd like to have baselines. And I think one of the issues there is in the future, we're looking at saying, how well is this working? Is this intersection efficient? Is it working well? Is it safe? And what are the metrics we use to make that determination? So I think part of it, as Ed pointed out, is that we're at a disadvantage. We don't have the data, and these are really cool drawings, but we can't generate cool things like that, and we don't have the data that you guys have. So I guess one of the things, and this will touch on a point that Scott will talk about later, I guess, which is we want to be able to say, okay, if this design is going to be built as built, does it work? Does it work as well as it should? In the future, if we say we don't like it, we want to be able to say we don't like it because, and we have data to prove that, and it's the right metric. It's the same thing you guys would look at, Vdot would look at, to say, yeah, this intersection is not functioning as it should. So I guess the issue here that Bill, perhaps you could discuss is there an opportunity somehow we can work with you guys to come up with understand what your post-construction monitoring would look like and what kind of data that we could use, say 5 years down the line, and look at this intersection saying it's not working. We need to do something different.
Right. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I mean, we'd be glad. We can share with you the data that we have. There was analysis done. Our primary data, of course, is traffic counts. And then what happens with traffic counts? I mean, traffic counts are existing conditions, a moment in time when that amount of traffic was identified, the throughs, the turning movements from all directions, morning rush and evening rush, that sort of thing. And those are taken from time to time. We can share that with you. But then the next thing we do with the data is forecast. What would be the future, forecast, just like forecasting weather, except instead of 7-day forecast, we're basically doing a 20, 30-year forecast of how we expect the traffic to grow. If we expect the traffic to grow, it is, I don't want to get too complicated because it'll complicate in my own head, but there is an extraordinary regional model that is done. The Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, the local governments, in this case Fairfax County, feeds information into these models. That information is based on highest and best use of land as the zoning would allow. I mean, just an example, a difference between a single family home subdivision on 1 acre lots versus a condo building. Obviously, that piece of land, depending on how it's zoned and when it's anticipated to projected to be developed to its highest and best use, then that would generate additional traffic volumes. That gets fed into a model, and a longer range forecast is developed. With projects, we take that information and look at the localized corridor along with a lot more local data. So whatever data we have in terms of that, I'll be glad to share with you. Then to answer your question about in the future, so we would be looking to see, we expect that this will function well. We expect this will function well. Now, it's not going to function perfectly because we're in Northern Virginia and nothing really functions perfectly, but it's going to function much better than it has in the past. And but we will be taking more counts in the future and seeing how those counts hold up, perhaps to our forecasts or certainly to reality. Now, another thing we'll do to fine tune this, and this is a part of the project ultimately, and I know this ties to some other questions that some folks had, is the signal timings. Because, rather than putting more asphalt down, you try to become as efficient as you can with the asphalt that you already have down, the number of lanes you have in the signal system. And so we will be looking with the contractor and our Northern Region Operations Center, which is includes our traffic engineering and signal gurus, to make sure we're optimizing this signal. And then also we're looking to optimize the entire corridor. Someone talked about synchronization of the signals. That is something that will be done as part of this project as well. So we can share the information that we have with you as it's helpful to you.
Perfect.
And Mike and Bill, if I could just add to that, when we talk about signal timings, that's actually something that has not been done yet for the permanent configuration. We have to go through another process while it's under construction as we get closer to final completion to see what the actual traffic volumes are within about 6 months of the permanent roadway and intersections being opened. At that point, we'll actually go back out, recount data to see what the current traffic volumes are, and then use that to run the timing analysis in coordination with Vdot to make sure, like Bill said, that all the signals are operating as efficiently as they can and they're all synchronized along the whole corridor. So that's still something that has to be done.
Bill, we'll have a different discussion about this some other time, but we'd love to be able to have a model essentially of the Great Falls traffic corridor, including all our feeder roads, and have as much data as we can. And be great if we could visualize that too in kind of a spatial data kind of way. And I don't know if that's something we could pluck out of your macro level data systems or not, but if that's possible, that would be terrific.
Yeah, I mean, I can ask. I'm not familiar with how that can be pulled out like you're describing. I'm not familiar with that, but we can ask.
Okay, Steve, we have a question for you. There's, can you show the final intersection design for the right turn for trucks, and that it showing that we should have sufficient turn clearance there to make for the big trucks to make that turn?
I think this is it. Hopefully you're seeing it on the screen here.
Yeah.
It's two different graphics only because it's opposing turning movements, if you will, and it's easier to do them on two screens than try to overlap everything. But these show all the movements, right and left turn lanes to and from Tolston. Again, with that WB40 design vehicle, and they can accommodate all the movements in each direction.
Hey, Steve, can you just quickly, I remember there was a question somebody had about some other vehicles, maybe other vans, but also school buses and fire trucks. Can you just describe that as related to the WB-40?
Yeah, so we looked at those. They are typically shorter than the WB-40, but they're not articulated. So the turning parameters are different, but we did check those, and they all fit. They all turn within the pavement. They're not off tracking, not having to go into opposing lanes or anything like that. The one thing I did want to point out on this slide, there was a comment earlier about the nose or the median on Tolston south of the intersection being really far away and people turning down the wrong side of Tolston. What you can see in green here, this is the median on the south side of Route 7, and that green shading is a new median extension that's going to be built as part of this project. I know right now there's concerns that it's difficult to see if you're approaching Route 7 from the north, so you're heading south on Tolston. As you look across the intersection, it's difficult to see which lane people are in and whether people coming north are going to turn right, left, or go through. Part of that is because of the staggered stop bar. And you can see it in this configuration where the left turn is offset much further back than what the through turn or the through lane and the right turn lanes are. When I flip to the next slide in the permanent configuration, you can see we're going to realign all of those so that the northbound approach, the left turn, the through movement, and the right are at the same location. They're closer to the intersection. That allows us to extend this median further to the north. And it also squares everything up. So when you're looking across the intersection from the north side to the south side, everybody's going to be facing you at the same location. Same thing with all of the other approaches. You can see everything is squared up so that you essentially only have to look at one location to be able to see who is at the intersection and which lane they're in.
Okay, somebody's asking a very specific question here. Does the 290-foot right turn lane on westbound Route 7 include the 200-foot taper, or is a taper in addition to the 290-foot turn such that the total length is 490 feet?
It is in addition. So the total length from the beginning of the taper to the end of the turn lane, which is typically measured at the stop bar, that total length is 490 feet for the right turn lane from westbound to northbound.
Okay. We're going to need to move on. If we didn't answer your question, what we'll try to do is get those answered and either post it on our website or put out an addendum note to this meeting. But let's move on to the Arden subdivision and the policy on entrances and exits. And I might add, Bill brought up some good points. There is some question in our mind, and we really are looking for kind of what is the right answer on Vdot's policy. We know that there's secondary street acceptance requirements, including multiple connections in multiple directions standard. And some of the questions are what is the requirement? And there's issues in there for waivers, as Bill pointed out, but we're not quite sure we understand that process and how that works. So anything you can enlighten us on would be great. And Bill, add to your Bill Canis, add to that if I misspoke.
So yeah, so I'm not the expert on land development. I want to say that I think Bill said he's not a land development attorney, and I'm not a land development engineer. So I am not as familiar with those. I can find the right people that can answer those questions more specifically and better than me. But for today, I mean, I can answer a little bit of like what happened with Arden. I think many, some have already said, Arden with roughly 100 homes had the two entrances planned. And so please keep in mind, while I know I'm VDOT and we're one VDOT, but we are different divisions. And so I'm in charge of getting construction projects built. This land development project is where Fairfax County government will work with the developer, property owner, and VDOT in regards to the entrances. So when I came upon it, there were two, I was late in the game because construction is on a different track for our Route 7 project. And we had two entrances on Tolston. we're working with the Route 7 working group and some GFCA members. There was concern over the second entrance. And so we brought that to the attention of Fairfax County government and VDOT's land development section, and they took another look at it along with the Arden developer, and they agreed to one lane. So how did that happen is kind of in another section away from me, but obviously they reviewed it all and made a determination that that was workable to go with one. And I remember at the time, from where I was observing, there was a lot of, happiness in some community circles that second entrance was removed. And so from my standpoint, it works. I'm told that it works as one entrance on. Now, at the same time, or I don't know the timing exactly, but there were also questions about access directly onto 7 for Arden. And I can go back a little bit in time for that. One of VDOT's goals with this very large Route 7 primary highway widening project between Reston and Tysons is access management. And while I was not involved in all of the details of that in the early design, I know there were a lot of challenges in communities up and down the corridor as VDOT was trying to control access in various locations. So median crossovers have been closed, certain streets, you can't make all movements, maybe it's right in, right out, et cetera. And so from the get-go, VDOT was not interested in another access point for Arden right out onto Route 7. And so that was kind of one of the fundamental principles of the Route 7 project design. And so that's why that was not something that happened. Now, later on, we did have more discussions with some people even on this call, and we went back to Arden at a much later time, and asked Arden if they would be interested in a access point off of 7. And that is, even though that really didn't fit with VDOT's goals of the corridor, but we did make an unbiased to Arden request if would they be interested in kind of a right in or something to that. I think it was right in, right out, or maybe just right in. And Arden developers said no. Now, they were certainly much farther along in the land development process and laying out their lots and so on, but they indicated that they were not interested in that. And of course, at that point, we said thank you, and that pretty much closed the entrance conversation as it regards to Arden and VDOT.
Thank you, Bill. If I could just say, I'll take you up on your offer to do this offline if you'd like.
Yes.
Learning experience for us to understand why from that proffer I read you, it seemed that VDOT had the full authority of waiver. So we'd just like to understand where that originates from. At the time that was described to us, the VDOT spokesman said that there was a statute that had been passed in Richmond that we understood him to say precluded cul-de-sacs from ever having just one in and out. So anyway, we'd like to, I don't want to belabor that tonight, but we would like to learn if there is such a statute, where did it come from? Is this a guideline? VDOT's, this is the only way we learn. We learn what the rules of the road are by asking about such things. But we don't have to belabor that tonight. I'm happy to pursue that with you separately.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that the last the issue on Georgetown Pike, the impact of Arden traffic on Georgetown Pike. Unless you have anything else you want to add to that on that, Pam, I think that there isn't anything that we need to put to them directly, but I'll wait for your response. And while you're doing that, let's move on to the intersection design. Again, I think one of the things is, as Bill pointed out, we might want to follow up this call with a letter to you guys or some questions or issues about things like the intersections and what we might be able to do in the future in terms of evaluating their effectiveness and how we would work that with Vdot in the future. Scott,
Okay.
did you have anything else you wanted to add to that as far as discussion?
No, I really appreciate you all coming here tonight. And also the news that we saw today about the transportation funding bill. I hope maybe that presents an opportunity to properly fund what hasn't been funded.
Okay. I think Pam is online now. Pam, did you have anything else you want to add to discussion before we move on in the agenda? Okay. Well, let's move on. I'm going to give a very quick overview of the next town hall meeting we're going to have, and then Bill Canis is going to have some concluding remarks.
Excuse me, Mike. I'm sorry. You didn't see my text.
I didn't.
I reserved my right for questions until the end.
All right.
So,
well, go ahead.
I'm ready. Sorry to interrupt there.
I thought that was Pam sending me the text.
You thought you would get out easy, but actually I think Pam just unmuted herself. So Pam, if you're there, go ahead.
Okay, I'll just make this brief. I would hope that we would get accurate and actual traffic, not extrapolated, actual traffic counts on Georgetown Pike. I realize that it's difficult to get that done right now, but soon we should have, Vdot should do traffic counts before the end of the project and after the end of the project, because we're seeing increasing traffic. I realize some of that's because commuter traffic is using the Pike and trying to avoid Route 7, but I think some of it's going to stay. That's all I have to say. We need to have that done.
Okay, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mike. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jennifer Falcone. I am chair of the Land Use and Zoning Committee of the GFCA. And I have a couple of questions that cover a few topics that were touched upon, but I'd like a little more information since we went beyond the intersection of Arden and sort of up the road a piece. Can you tell me what the status of the work is at Bear and Cameron on the Meadows Farms in frontage? Because it appears as if that section of the road is untouched at this point. So what is the schedule for the work directly in front of Meadows Farms? And once you answer that, I'll move on to the next one.
So they're right at Meadows Farms there at Bear and Cameron. That's one of the more complicated areas of the project. And the reason that work has, I don't want to say delayed, but it's the latter stages of work in that location are because of right-of-way acquisitions that have to occur, utility relocations that were ongoing, and then the overall sequencing of traffic. The one thing that I know most of you are probably aware of, Washington Gas is putting in a gas main relocation through the entire limits of the project. And that's going on right as we're trying to build all of the Route 7 improvements as well. So Washington Gas has been working in that area. Roadway construction is expected to start here later this summer in that area to start reworking again. That was one of the first areas of the project that we worked on, was to implement the triple left turns from westbound 7 to southbound Bear and Cameron to try to alleviate some of the queuing and congestion in that westbound direction. That was completed, I think, prior to the fall of 2019. And then we had to stop and wait for right-of-way to catch up for utility relocations to occur. And now construction is going to be starting back out here later this summer.
Okay, so when do you project that from Colvin Run to Spring Mill Road, that section on the north side of the road is going to be completed?
It won't be completely done until 2024. There's a lot of different stages of work that have to happen out there. There's roadway construction and drainage improvements. There are some noise barriers that have to go in out there that'll take longer. A lot of these areas, you'll see work progressing, and then we'll have to wait for another area to catch up. So that's one area that's, again, it's going to be all the way through the end of the project until that area is complete.
Great. I'm happy that you mentioned noise barriers, sound walls. Okay, so it appears as if I've received some notification and questions about the lack of a sound wall planned for Arden, and that it predated the actual permitting of that particular parcel. Therefore, it is exempt. But yet it appears I didn't have a chance to memorize all of this, so forgive me. It appears that you may be actually working with a similar situation across the way in installing sound walls. So Vdot is saying that you're not responsible for a sound wall at Arden. Is that correct?
That is correct. So there's two different situations. First, noise could be a whole nother hour-long discussion, and we won't let this take that long, obviously. The noise process is set up, and we have to follow the federal requirements for noise barriers. For any noise barriers to be considered, the development has to be in place at the time the project goes through the public process. So the Arden development was not permitted until after the date of public knowledge. The date of public knowledge is when the environmental document was complete. So because the Arden development was done and permitted after that date, they don't qualify for the noise wall processes and studies and ultimately construction in accordance with federal criteria. So that's why they're not getting a noise wall there. Now, we did do some rough look in that area. Even though you're adding 100 houses, those houses are not all right up against Route 7. And because of the larger size of the lots, even if that project had been permitted prior to the date of public knowledge, it probably would not meet federal criteria for warranted, feasible, and reasonableness. And there's a whole lot of details in there, but it's whether or not the noise levels increase above a certain threshold. And then the reasonableness criteria is how much noise wall needs to be constructed to provide a noise benefit to each of those residences. So there are federal criteria and federal thresholds that were not met in a number of different manners for that development, and that's why they're not getting a noise wall at Arden. Now, across the street, where there are houses that have been there a lot longer, Wolf Trap Woods, and the Wolf Den communities, they are getting noise walls because they met all of the federal criteria. Again, that process went through Vdot review and federal highway review, and that's why there are noise walls going in some areas, and in some areas there are not.
Can you tell us the status of the noise walls or sound walls, sound barriers for the rest of Route 7, and point us in the right direction of if there is a design that we can look at that is consistent, or how we get the update on all of the noise walls for the remainder of Route 7?
Sure. There's a noise report, and we can send this out to Scott and Mike. There's a link on the project website, connectroute7.org, that you can go to. That has all the information. It has the full noise report. All of the noise barriers for the entire length of the project that are in that report that were identified to meet federal criteria have been approved. They're in the construction plans, and they will be built. If you drive to the west end of the project, you can actually start to see some of them have been installed. As you get west of Utterback Store Road, between Utterback Store and Reston Avenue, you'll see some of the permanent noise barriers are already up, and they've got the architectural treatments on the front side with the dogwood pattern on the top of them. That's what they're going to look like for the entire length of the corridor, everywhere they will be installed.
And we do have an interactive map on our project website where you can zoom in and you can see the locations. There's a legend that tells you what color is what on the lines, and you can see where the noise walls are planned to be. Of course, some of them are already built, but you can see where the rest will go. And if you take a look at that and you have any questions, there's also, we have a hotline, and you can contact our project team, and we can go into more detail for you at certain locations.
Thank
Steve,
you.
will you be posting your slides that you presented on the Connect Route 7, or is it possible for you to send us a link that we can share with everyone so that they can access those sites? Because I think several people were trying to get a closer look at what you presented.
Yeah, I meant to mention that at the outset. We'll email these slides to you so you can send them out to everybody that's on this call. We've done that for all the other meetings, is to send it out to the individual homeowners groups and community associations afterwards. So we'll get these. Mike, I sent you one this afternoon. I know it was late. There was one tweak to one of these slides that I made since then, so I'll send you an update tonight.
Okay, I'll wait for
I
that.
just have one last question and then I'll turn it back to you, Mike. Bill, you mentioned that you had a conversation with Toll Brothers regarding getting an entrance and exit off of Route 7, whether it was a right in, right out, whatever at one time, and that in your discussion with VDOT and the powers that be, you came to realize that, okay, well, maybe because of what the community wanted, what the organizations wanted to relieve some of the traffic on Tolston Road, that VDOT would agree to that, but it was Toll Brothers' decision not to pursue that at that time. Since there's this development is only in phase 1 at this time, and the site plan has not been submitted and approved for phase 2, there's the possibility, it's been tossed around, that there's a, since the parcel goes all the way east to Dreamweaver, which I believe is a private road and not accepted into the secondary streets at this time, that quite possibly that could be some access either in or out of Arden. Does VDOT still stand by the possibility of allowing Arden to develop an entry directly to Route 7?
So that's a wonderfully difficult question, and the answer is that we would prefer not to have additional access points onto Route 7. However, given that we were open to it, I guess that was a couple of years ago at this point, I believe we would entertain that. And I did talk a little bit with Mike Barclay about that very question. As you point out, Dreamweaver does appear to be a private, it's almost like a shared driveway. So you got 3 very nice houses that are right there. And then there's, another very nice house on the other side of it. So those are adjacent property owners, and I'm sure they would also want to be part of the discussions on that. So I would just say that we are open to the possibility, although we don't favor it, but we're open to the possibility.
Okay, we need to move on here. And let me, I'm going to give a very quick overview of our next town hall meeting, and then Bill Canis will have a few concluding remarks. Our third and final town hall meeting, transportation related meeting, we're going to hold later in the spring, maybe in the early summer, but it's going to focus on Georgetown Pike. And as you guys all know, the whole 12-mile expanse of Georgetown Pike from Route 7 to Route 123 in McLean is on Virginia's Register of Historic Places, and of course, it's a scenic and historic byway. As Bill mentioned in his opening remarks, our surveys tell us that traffic congestion on the Pike is perhaps the most pressing concern of our residents. And I haven't been working as long with GFCA as some of my associates, but I've been here long enough to watch some of the interactions that the community's had with VDOT. And from what I've observed, VDOT's culture, like most state transportation agencies, is dominated by engineers and the way engineers think. That's not a criticism of VDOT at all. It's frankly their job to think that way. And if you look at Georgetown Pike purely from the perspective of a traffic engineer, what do you see? You see an exceptionally tantalizing east-west commuter corridor that would link Route 7 with the Beltway and GW Parkway. And it's just how traffic engineers work. But if you look at it from the perspective of the Pike from our community's perspective, you'd see a very prized community asset that needs protection and preservation from overdevelopment and overuse. And I think these differing perspectives are a source of frustration VDOT has with us and that we have with VDOT. So I listened really carefully in our town hall meeting last month on the Springvale one-lane bridge. And our bridges working group argued that the current one-lane bridge was not a source of accidents based on what I thought was a really good detailed analysis of historical data, and proved, I think, the retention of the one-lane bridge would serve as a very important traffic calming measure to control speeds on Springvale Road and traffic volume ultimately on Georgetown Pike. Changing to a 2-lane bridge would increase speeds and perversely create more accidents north of the bridge on the stretch of road where most of the accidents on that road occur. And also, we're finding the current 1-lane bridge doesn't cause problematic rush hour backups back towards Route 7. All of these I thought were great arguments, but the VDOT engineer in our call essentially dismissed the arguments, and I'm being a little harsh when I say that, in favor of retaining a 1-lane bridge pretty much out of hand by saying the AASHTO design standard calls for a 2-lane bridge and that his hands were just tied. The replacement had to be a 2-lane bridge because that's what the design book says. And again, I'm not trying to be critical. I mean, rigid adherence to design standards, that's how engineers are traditionally taught to think. But it's not the only way to think. And in fact, many state transportation agencies have become advocates of context-sensitive design. And that's a design approach promoted by the Federal Highway Administration, where road designs are tailored to fit the environments from which they're being built. And I'm going to quote from FHA what they say about context-sensitive design. Context-sensitive design asks questions first about the need and purpose of the transportation project, and then equally addresses safety, mobility, and the preservation of scenic, aesthetic, historic, environmental, and other community values. Context-sensitive design involves a collaborative, interdisciplinary approach in which citizens are part of the design team. It's almost like FHWA was thinking about us when they wrote that. In our third town hall meeting, we plan to introduce GFCA's Protect the Pike initiative, likely in conjunction with McLean Citizens Association. The initiative is going to focus on traffic congestion and protection of Georgetown Pike status as a scenic byway. And we hope to build that initiative around traffic calming and context-sensitive design principles. And what we would like in doing that is we'd like to engage with VDOT in a different way than we've done in the past. We'd like to work, instead of looking at every project as a one-off discussion, we'd like to look at kind of our whole ecosystem of traffic and roads and look at that using context-sensitive design principles, so that we can look at things that affect us on a cumulative basis instead of a single one-off project basis. We'd like to look beyond the AASHTO design book and look at things like that bridge, for example, the 1-lane bridge. How does it contribute to traffic on Georgetown Pike? How does it fit the cultural, what's the cultural fit of that solution in our community? And does it have value as a traffic calming measure? And I'll point out, by the way, that VDOT has a lot of experience, or has experience with at least one context-sensitive design in the area here. VDOT's worked with Middleburg, Virginia, on a traffic calming initiative on Route 50. Like 193 is our main street, Route 50 is Middleburg's main street. And we've reached out to Middleburg officials to ask for their help and advice, and we hope that, and we believe that their experience might be valuable precedent for us as we look at a similar program on Georgetown Pike. So we really would like to figure out a way we can get VDOT to embrace our discussions with them on transportation matters in that context of a wider context than just single project discussions. So we'll keep you posted on that next town hall meeting, but we just wanted to give you a flavor of what's coming down the pike, as they'd say. So Bill, with that, I'll turn it over to you for concluding remarks.
I can't beat that last comment, Mike, but I would say before I wrap up that Supervisor Faust is still with us, and I did want to ask John if he had any words of wisdom for us tonight before I wrap up here.
I appreciate the opportunity, Bill. I don't have anything to add. I thought that was an outstanding presentation, and I really appreciate the time and effort that Bill Cutler and Steve Kuntz put into it, and I think the questions were outstanding. I hope everybody shares this feeling. I'll go out on a limb and say I feel much better about that intersection having sat through that presentation. I know there's still issues, but it's clearly a matter of time, and you know, sooner the better. I think they have a pretty good plan. So I'm looking forward to the next discussion and the discussion on context sensitive design. We used that concept whenever we tried to get the Georgetown Pike Route 7 intersection adjusted down to one lane, and there's a lot of good language there to protect the community. I'm glad we're going to start focusing on it.
Great. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
And thank you for attending our whole program tonight. Thank you also. I want to thank Bill and Steve, of course, for their dialogue with us tonight. And I want to also thank Scott Knight and Michael Barclay, our transportation co-chairs, for putting together this program. Just a couple points I'd make before we adjourn. As Supervisor Faust knows, the Great Falls Citizens Association has supported the widening of Route 7 since the get-go. The Route 7 working group, which you referenced, I believe was catalyzed in part by Eric Knudsen and Tim Thompson, two GFCA members, and who helped galvanize Reston and McLean to participate in that long process, which has gone on for, I believe, 9 years. So our rationale for supporting the Route 7 widening was fairly simple. It is that we need to find a way through better transportation on Route 7 to keep traffic off of Georgetown Pike. Georgetown Pike is a 2-lane road. It's not meant to be a huge national artery. So we want Route 7 to be successful, and we've supported that all along. One threat to that is, of course, that if Tolston Road, Colvin Run Road, and the Barron Cameron Springvale intersection become difficult, then on Route 7, that people will jump off and go over to Georgetown Pike. That's something that we have to be aware of all the time. And tonight's discussion is about Tolston Road. If the backup for people who are residents of Arden and Vernon Drive and other places, it becomes difficult on a daily basis, they will no longer take Route 7. They will go north and they will take Georgetown Pike. And that is not a result that we want to see. So the discussion that Steve and Bill gave us tonight on managing the traffic, the request we've had for further data in terms of the projections of how many trips are going to be coming in and out of Arden are really critical to our being able to collectively manage that, so that going north on Tolston Road doesn't become the only option for people living in that part of Great Falls. And that could certainly become the case if this becomes a huge bottleneck that people can't get through, or if there continue to be accidents there which take people's lives. People will just stop using Route 7. Nobody on this call wants to see that happen, so we want to be thorough in discussing that with you, and that was one of the reasons for tonight's program. Well, anyway, I don't want to go on any further, but I want to thank all the attendees. At one point, I think we had almost 60 attendees on tonight. Lots of good questions from the community. And of course, this program would not have been complete without all those community residents joining us tonight. So thank you all. And unless Mike and Scott want to have, if I've missed something, otherwise, I want to say thank you all for attending. We will stay in touch. Thank you very much.